Good morning and welcome, U.S. Customs and Border Protection's Air Marine Operations Tucson Air Branch. My name is Michael Montgomery. I'm the director of the Tucson Air Branch. It's a great honor for me to introduce our acting commissioner, Mark A. Morgan.
Thanks, Michael. Good morning, everybody. I appreciate everybody taking the time out of a busy schedule, and hopefully we'll try to wrap this up before we get to the 105-degree temperature I'm told is going to hit us here today. So, look, today we want to take a few minutes, and we're going to take a couple extra minutes longer than we generally do, because we want to talk about the accomplishments and the mission of CBP as we close out the entire fiscal year of 2020. Most importantly, this incredible, steadfast devotion to duty of the men and women of CBP and their unwavering commitment to this great nation. Unfortunately, and I've said this many times, especially in the last few months, their sacrifices, as well as the sacrifices of their families, are seldom the topic of discussion or well-deserved accolades. Rather, they've had to continue to endure unjustified, misguided, and misinformed rhetoric, being called stormtroopers, or others celebrating when a fellow law enforcement officer has been shot and clinging to life in the hospital. It's disgusting and it's unacceptable, especially when the rhetoric is coming from our own Congress. But the men and women of CBP, they have not been deterred. They remain on our front lines of our nation's borders, working through some of the most adverse conditions as of late that we've ever asked them to work through. The depth, breadth, and sheer magnitude and complexity of what we do is simply astounding. From addressing illegal migration, seizing counterfeit goods, assisting our law enforcement partners during civil unrest and natural disasters, going after trafficking organizations, apprehending gang members, murderers, pedophiles, and other sexual predators, seizing almost 1 million pounds of drugs this past fiscal year, and preventing products made from forced labor from being introduced in the United States supply chain, all while ensuring legitimate trade and travel continues to support our economic growth. Our adversaries, the terrorists, the criminal organizations, human smugglers, drug traffickers, become increasingly sophisticated every single day. It's critical that we must stay ahead of the threat. It's why we have and will continue to say borders matter. It's why we say and will continue to say border security is national security. It's why we must have all the tools at our disposal, from innovative technology, including the wall. It's critical to enhancing our overall operational capacity to know who and what is coming across our borders to do us harm. And yes, we're also there to assist our DHS fellow law enforcement partners, as well as partners in cities across this country, to uphold the rule of law while violent criminal opportunists burned buildings, looted, and assaulted countless law enforcement personnel. We will never waver or back down from upholding the rule of law. 2020, simplistically, can be broken down really in two phases, pre-COVID and post-COVID, and I'll quickly address both. As we entered FY20 last October, we were still navigating through an unprecedented immigration crisis. And we said this many times as well, even though Congress again and again failed the American people by not passing a single piece of meaningful legislation in 2020 that would have addressed this crisis overnight, our president and this administration continued to provide us the tools we needed. That's not a political statement. As acting commissioner, that's just a fact. And we can describe every single one of those tools and those initiatives that's been provided by this administration that has addressed the crisis. And those network of initiatives and policies implemented by this administration effectively ended catch and release, which we all know is the primary pull factor that has prompted the illegal migration flow to the United States. By this past February, the illegal migration flow dropped 75%. And we saw a changing demographics from mostly families and unaccompanied children from Central America, which was the genesis of the crisis, to single adult males from Mexico making the journey for economic gain. Our in-custody numbers, for example, went from the height of 20,000 to less than 3,400 by the end of February. Our partnerships with the government of Mexico and our Northern Triangle partners as well has never been stronger. We are together collectively attacking the immigration crisis and other crises like the global pandemic as the regional partners that we are and we should, stronger than ever before, unlike we've ever partnered before. We saw our overall encounters along the southwest border drop from almost 1 million last fiscal year to less than 458,000 this fiscal year. That's a 53% reduction from one year to the next. Families, we saw a 53%, families, which were the driving force behind the crisis last year, dropped from 530,000 to less than 80,000 this fiscal year. That in itself is an 87% reduction. Again, the genesis of the crisis were families coming from the Northern Triangle countries as economic migrants. That's the main focus that we had to address. The network of initiatives and policies by this administration attacked that crisis and reduced it by 87%. And UACs dropped 59% from last year. But look, we've been saying this lately as well. It's not just about the numbers. It's also about having the tools and the policies to effectively apply consequences and remove those who illegally enter and do not have valid asylum claims. This administration has been overwhelmingly successful at shutting down many of the loopholes being exploited, which Congress has refused to address again and again. Make no mistake. We are in a better position right now because of this administration's immigration policies and initiatives. The end of catch and release, and as well as other collective efforts to further reduce the pull factors like MPP, the Migrant Protection Protocols, have been game changers, and they have made the difference. The administration message is clear. Illegal immigrants will no longer be released into the country. They will no longer be able to abscond without consequences, and they will be quickly returned to their country of origin. I want to take a minute. If these policies and initiatives and these essential tools, like the wall, if we were to remove them, we would likely see an influx that overwhelms even what we saw last year when we saw 150,000 illegal aliens reach our border in a single month and more than 1 million in a single year. If we continue to provide protections under the umbrella of sanctuary cities and other rewards such as free health care, driver's license, jobs that they're not legally authorized to have, we will further incentivize a new wave of unprecedented illegal migration. If they know that they will be released, if they know that no consequences will be applied, and they know they will not only be protected but rewarded for violating the sovereign laws of our nation, there will be nothing in place to stop them. Now, this administration's policies have also allowed CBP to successfully confront the COVID pandemic during the second half of 2020. As COVID-19 spread beyond China, CBP had to quickly shift our focus from immigration enforcement to that of a public health perspective now. Beginning early, a series of presidential proclamations empowered CBP to suspend the entry of travelers from arriving from countries affected by the pandemic. We, CBP, we were on the front lines of that. We immediately began implementing that direction, that strategy. And we shifted our efforts and implemented funneling at the end to 15 major and specific airports. And there is no doubt from my position as acting commissioner that the CBP's efforts, the men and women, in implementing that effective containment and mitigation COVID strategy by this administration saved countless American lives. Often was not mentioned in the media is the administration's continued decisive and effective COVID containment and mitigation strategies along our land borders as well, by authorizing unprecedented restrictions of non-essential travel across our North American land borders beginning in March. We saw an immediate and significant drop in overall travel back and forth across our border, a reduction of hundreds of thousands per day, Additionally, the President's support of the CDC public health order, which directed CBP to remove illegal aliens we encounter in between our ports of entry immediately to further reduce the introduction of COVID-19 into our congregate settings. Individuals trying to illegally enter often travel across several countries, navigating through COVID hotspots, are often jammed in overcrowded and unsanitary stash houses or tractor trailers, and you'll hear more about that in a minute, which act as active petri dishes for COVID-19, disregarding all medical guidelines and jeopardizing the lives of everyone they come in contact with. And because of this administration supporting policies like the CDC order, what we refer to as Title 42, today we are removing 90% of those we encounter in less than 2 hours. Again, from a global, not an immigration enforcement standpoint, but from a global pandemic strategy, an effective containment and mitigation aspect of that, it has saved countless American lives. These policies and initiatives reflect this administration's determined efforts and effective strategies to prevent the entry and slow the spread and further introduction of COVID-19. And they also help safeguard the health of our own CBP personnel, as well as the American public and the migrants themselves. The health risk is real. CBP has been significantly impacted. We've had over 2,300 CBP employees that have tested positive for COVID. We have had 13 CBP personnel die because of COVID, 12 of those directly in the line of duty. And I want to make sure I say this clear. These individuals are true heroes, and our nation owes them a debt of gratitude for their courage and continued commitment. The last thing that I'll say before I turn it over, after the pandemic ceases, we will face the same kind of influx of illegal migration that we confronted in 2019. In fact, we're anticipating it's likely to be worse due to the deteriorating and worsening economic conditions, not only in Mexico, but in the entire Western Hemisphere that was exacerbated by COVID-19. This makes it even more critical that we understand how important border security is to our national security and continuing to provide CBP the tools we need to protect this great nation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our Deputy Commissioner, Robert Perez.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all here today. I'd like to expand a little bit, as my colleagues will as well, on some of the other topics and points and, frankly, challenges that we at CBP have faced this year. The 61,000 incredible employees of this incredible agency, and how their wherewithal, how their perseverance was tested throughout this fiscal year, I think is worth elaborating on. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to do so, Commissioner, and thank you. So CBP law enforcement personnel, for example, responded to numerous civil disturbances over the course of fiscal year 2020, providing support to many of our federal, state, and local law enforcement partners all across the country. We answered the call, once again, to enhance and augment law enforcement capabilities and capacities in order to protect lives and protect property. For example, specifically in Portland, Oregon, our agents and officers helped the Federal Protective Service, another agency that is part of the Department of Homeland Security, safeguard the Mark O. Hatfield Courthouse, the seat of justice in Portland, from being burned to the ground by violent criminals. Our personnel faced all kinds of dangers while there, including assaults with rocks, frozen water bottles, lasers, and commercial-grade fireworks. While withstanding these vicious acts of violence, our agents and officers remained focused and on preserving law and order. They remained steadfast in their determination to carry out their mission, and they remained impervious to the oftentimes inaccurate mischaracterizations and misinformation that was being peddled by too many others. At CBP, our agents and officers and all of our employees are expected to conduct themselves with the utmost professionalism at all times. This was the case in Portland and is the case every day, whenever and wherever our employees are asked to serve. Integrity is one of this agency's core values. Our agency fosters a culture of integrity and transparency where every employee is held to the highest standard of honesty and ethical conduct. The public seeks, values, and expects integrity in the people who wear the badge. And all of us, every single one of us in CBP, continually strives to live up to those expectations every day while on duty and off duty. I'd just like to share one other example for you, if I may. In March of this year, an off-duty Border Patrol agent in Midland, Texas, heard a disturbance while he was shopping. When he investigated what the disturbance was all about, he encountered an individual actively assaulting several people, including a small child, with a knife. After identifying himself as a law enforcement professional and drawing his weapon, the agent was successfully able to disarm the assailant and held him until local police arrived and took him into custody. Without a doubt, that off-duty Border Patrol agent, his selfless intervention in that situation saved lives on that day. This is just one example of countless others over the course of this last year and over the years, the nearly 28 that I've served with this agency, that I can rattle off for you folks time and again. Most recently, just off the top of my head, a few years ago, when some of our agents helped track down some convicted murderers who were fugitives who broke out of a New York State prison in upstate New York and helped apprehend them, or some of our agents and officers who were the very first responders on scene when a mass shooting occurred in El Paso last year as well. That is who CBP is. That is who the men and women of this agency are, earning and commanding the respect of those and the trust of those we serve and protect. I'd like to now also highlight one other issue, another really truly distinguished, how CBP truly distinguished itself this past year, and an issue that underscores, frankly, how important and incredibly complex and diverse the mission of CBP is, and frankly, again, the incredible work and character of our frontline employees. When people often think of our agency, of CBP, they may not know that our activities and our authorities actually extend well beyond just processing travelers and cargo and patrolling the areas along our border. Our agency and its efforts also are on the front lines in combating forced labor, what is essentially modern-day slavery. It's just another example on how this agency, how CBP is on America's front line. This fiscal year, our Office of Trade issued an unprecedented 13 withhold release orders on shipments containing suspected products produced by forced labor, including 8 of these orders on products emanating from China. In fact, CBP issued more withhold release orders in this fiscal year than we had had in the 4 previous fiscal years combined, reflecting our commitment to combating this absolutely disgusting and inexcusable activity. The estimated value of the cargo detained as a result of these withhold release orders rose significantly in this past fiscal year to nearly $50 million compared to just over $1 million last year. These efforts send a clear message to any organization using forced labor that CBP will not tolerate these unspeakable, inhumane activities that have placed so many men, women, and children in captive servitude, not only in Asia, but all over the world. Again, folks, after 28 years of being a part of this agency, every day I'm reminded of how great an honor, how wonderful a privilege it is to stand alongside the 61,000 plus men and women of CBP. Each and every one of them have my utmost respect and gratitude for all they do to protect this great nation. With that, I'd like to introduce the Chief of the U.S. Border Patrol, Mr. Rodney Scott.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. As you guys have just heard, border security is a complex, and CBP's mission is extremely broad. So when we say border security is national security, it's not a catchphrase, it's not a political statement, it's just a simple fact. I'd like to kind of bring it home. So in the simplest terms, border security is exactly like your home security. The safety of the people inside that home. Sorry, I'm going to have to drink some water here. So border security is very much the same as your home security. The security of those people inside depend on your ability to control who and what enters your home and when. CBP is not here to protect the borders. CBP exists to protect you, to protect the nation, to protect our citizens, and to protect the guests across this country. We do that by simply ensuring that we know who and what enters our home. Border Patrol's specific responsibility within that is to ensure that when people enter our home, they enter it through the front door, just like your home. Those front doors are the over 328 ports of entry that my partners in blue are standing ready to greet any individual and once again make sure that we know who and what is simply entering our home. So the statistics that the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioner pointed out, and some more you're going to hear as we go along, those are very important. But those are just outputs, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Those outputs are important. They're posted online as well. But what we're looking for really is the outcome. And the outcome, our real objective, is a safe and secure nation. To that end, we have built over 360 new miles of border wall, and we're driving hard towards completing 450 by the end of this year. Beyond the enduring capability that gives for us, that allows us to prevent and slow illegal activity, it also allows our agents to identify threats sooner and to respond to them much faster. Every mile of border system is an investment with an immediate return on investment to the American taxpayers that a single agent can patrol and secure more border with a border wall system in place than without. It's that simple. It's one example, a 12-mile section of border with the new border wall system freed up 150 agents in a 24-hour period. That equates to over $20 million return on investment each year going forward. Those agents were redeployed to other pre-identified resource gaps along the border, and that is, again, improving your security. Enhancing the mobility of our agents improves the safety of everyone in the border region, regardless of their nationality or their immigration status. The new wall system is allowing our agents to get out and to patrol areas that we had not been to in the recent past more consistently. It's also freeing up resources to specifically target transnational criminal organizations that prey on people and exploit the border on a daily basis. We are saving lives on the border and away from the border every day. This past year, Border Patrol agents rescued over 5,000 individuals found struggling in swift water, remote desert areas, rugged mountains, or locked inside stifling semi-tractor trailers. We also disrupted over 280 stash houses, crowded stash houses. These places have always been dangerous, but now with COVID-19, they are incubators. There's no social distancing. We rarely find people wearing masks, and the basic sanitary measures are non-existent. In recent weeks, we've found over 100 illegal aliens were rescued from a single locked from the outside semi-trailer when the temperatures were reaching 110 degrees. Air crews from this exact air branch, using a helicopter much like this with the hoist system on the side, working with Border Patrol agents, rescued an illegal alien that was found severely dehydrated in a very rugged area where he had been abandoned. Similar, another incident, an illegal alien was found trapped, surrounded by forest fire, was also rescued by a similar air and Border Patrol agents working together. In California, agents arrested a violent criminal illegal alien that was wanted for murder out of Rhode Island. As the Commissioner has said many times, every city, every state, every town is a border city, state, and town. CBP, I just want to highlight, we are not here to protect a line in the sand of borders. We are here 24/7, 365 to protect you. We are here to protect every city, town across the entire United States from an intertwined, extremely complex, and ever-evolving set of threats that have absolutely no intention whatsoever of staying at the border. In closing, I just want to highlight every person in this country is safer because of what CBP does. That's how broad our mission is. You're going to hear a little bit more about some statistics, the Air and Marine, and some other narcotics enforcement. I'm going to introduce Executive Director of Operations for our Air and Marine, Dennis McElhaney.
Well, thank you for being here, Commissioner, Deputy. It's a real pleasure to have this opportunity. I wanted to echo the Commissioner's remarks and thank the men and women of AMO and CBP for continuing to be steadfast in carrying out Homeland Security missions in spite of the unprecedented COVID-19 crisis. AMO as an organization is the smallest organization within CBP. It's an operational side, but we protect this country from the air and the marine side. We have roughly 1,800 agents, and our mission support personnel, our agents combine their law enforcement expertise with what you see around here, some extremely innovative platforms and technologies. I'd like to talk a minute about counter-narcotics. In fiscal year 20, CBP seized nearly 800,000 drugs of dangerous, and most of those are hard narcotics drugs. Marijuana stayed the same at about 582,000 pounds. Heroin was down 7% at 5,900. Meth was up 25% at 177,000 pounds, and fentanyl was up by 71% at 4,700 pounds. Cocaine was down 43% at 58,000 pounds. We can talk a little bit about that if you have any questions. Mexico is the principal supplier of heroin, meth, and other synthetic drugs, and remains a transit country for fentanyl cocaine into the United States. An increase in fentanyl production in Mexico is also deeply concerning as it's an epidemic of an opioid abuse continues in our nation. At Tucson's port of entry of Nogales last month, CBP officers seized 122 pounds of drugs with an estimated street value of more than $1.4 million. The drugs included fentanyl pills, heroin, and cocaine concealed in front of a truckload of hollowed-out floor tiles. Those are demonstrated right over there on that table. From the border to the interior of our heartland, and actually out to the rest of Central and South America, every single ounce of this poison devastates and destroys communities. There's no getting around that. The social isolation resulting from the pandemic has only worsened the drug crisis, as safety nets and other support mechanisms like family and friends are no longer readily available. Look, we've all been touched by this, and CBP is committed in intercepting these dangerous substances before they reach your city, your community, and your neighbors. AMO works with the U.S. Border Patrol and the Office of Field Operations, as well as our partner agencies like the U.S. Coast Guard on this important mission. In AMO, we also have a role in rescues during national disaster events as part of CBP's incident response efforts. For example, AMO's UH-60, like that one right there, and the P-3, which is parked behind you, they deploy all over to conduct damage assessments, missions, and search and rescue operations, as we've done this year for Hurricane Laura, Sally, and Delta. AMO also has a silent but critical presence in many high-profile national security special events, NSSEs, which this year include an aviation and maritime part for Super Bowl 54 in Miami, the Mardi Gras, and the Kentucky Derby. And what we do is, by having this secret kind of cover overhead, we're ensuring the safety of the participants and attendees for these events. This is just a fraction of what the men and women of AMO and CBP have accomplished this year, and I am truly humbled by their hard work and dedication. Now I'd like to take this and hand it over to OFO EAC William Farrar. Bill.
Thank you, XD. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone today, and welcome. Despite the pandemic, our ports of entry have remained open. The Office of Field Operations has never wavered from its mission of facilitating lawful trade and travel and protecting our nation. CBP officers and agriculture specialists at our land, air, and seaports processed more than 237 million travelers in FY20. Due to the pandemic and related travel restrictions, this number was down 42% from last year, when we saw over 410 million people. The Office of Field Operation continues to facilitate legitimate trade while actively engaged in trade enforcement efforts to protect the American people, safeguard our borders, and enhance the economy of the United States. We helped to ensure that lawful cargo kept moving during the pandemic. CBP processed $2.4 trillion in imports in FY20, ensuring that the goods coming into the country were safe and legal. For the health and well-being of the American families, CBP maintained the flow of food imports. roughly $14 billion worth of food was imported each and every month last year. Fiscal year 2020 was especially challenging. We saw an unprecedented accelerated pace in e-commerce as more and more of us did shopping from home. And of course, our nation's increased demand for medical equipment, supplies, and PPE due to the pandemic. One of the steps CBP took to address these challenges was to create a COVID-19 cargo resolution team, which helped to facilitate critical shipments of PPE to resolve cargo release issues. The swift release of legitimate medical products is vital to fighting this pandemic. And the CCRT helped secure the importation of over $2 billion in COVID-related equipment, medicines, and supplies. Without a doubt, those cargo shipments destined for our valiant healthcare workers helped to keep them safe and helped to keep us safe in this country. The CCRT was also instrumental in detecting and intercepting thousands of counterfeit COVID-19 related imports, such as medical masks, FDA prohibited medicines, and test kits. These counterfeits pose severe health and safety risks to consumers. For example, counterfeit pharmaceutical products are untested and fraudulently labeled. These bogus medicines are ineffective, harmful, and in some cases downright deadly. Additionally, these counterfeit goods severely damage U.S. businesses and their employees, as these companies, of course, depend on their intellectual property rights to stay in business. By the end of fiscal year 20, CBP recorded more than 23,700 seizures of counterfeit goods with an estimated value of $1.2 billion. The Office of Field Operation uses many tools and tactics to prevent counterfeit goods from entering the U.S. One of the CBP's key anti-counterfeiting initiative is Operation Megaflex. Operation Megaflex increases scrutiny on shipments within the international mail and express consignment systems, and it provides us with important threat-related data to support future targeting efforts and identify repeat offenders. Since the inception of Operation Megaflex in July of 2019, OFO has conducted monthly operations. These operations resulted in more than 4,200 seizures of illicit goods and 2,400 agriculture violations. In fiscal year 20, the Office of Field Operation continued to protect U.S. agriculture for prohibited and potentially dangerous foreign plant, pest, and animal products. We've deployed biothreat exclusion coordinators in the cities of Detroit, Boston, New York, and Houston, and increased the number of agriculture canine teams by 36%. The core mission of CBP is advancing national security. CBP is uniquely positioned to continue to enhance the safety of our country from increasingly complex, evolving threats of terrorism and transnational criminal organizations. Working together with the U.S. Border Patrol and HSI, OFO's outbound operations targeting those transnational criminal organizations have resulted in seizures of countless firearms, explosives, and ammunition, as well as over $16 million in currency in fiscal year 20. Before I turn this back over to Commissioner Morgan, I want to emphasize that our work and the threats we face are persistent and ever evolving. The Office of Field Operations will continue to be collaborative, innovative, and forward-leaning to help protect the country from those who wish to do us harm. Thank you for your time today, and Commissioner Morgan.
Thanks, EAC. Hey, so look, I appreciate everybody's time and patience. We did this by design. One of the challenge aspects we have is our continuing education, not only of the members of our Congress, but also the American people, so they fully understand the depth, breadth, magnitude, and complexity of not only the mission of CBP, but the threats we face every single day. And I tell you, we could go, I promise we won't, but we could go on for another 2 hours describing in more depth and breadth and detail exactly what that mission entails. But I'd like to end it and turn it over to you for questions by really saying, reemphasizing something that Chief Rodney Scott said is, we exist for the American people. We exist to protect our home. With that, I'll turn it over for questions. Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask you about the border wall. Does CBP have like a metric to say to the taxpayer, you invested billions of dollars and this is a success? to get apprehensions below a certain level, or is there any type of metric for success for the wall?
Yeah, so I'll briefly talk about that, and I can turn it over to Chief Rodney Scott. So the answer is yes, and I think that's a key question. And look, we've got that data. We're more than happy to provide it to everybody, because I think that's important when there's a lot of misinformation and hyperbole out there, like when I hear that walls are ineffective. It's just not true. It's just not true, and the data shows us not true. And so when we talk about success, we need to take a look at a couple of things, not just the output, but also the outcomes Chief Scott earlier described. So we can give you the output of as far as where we've had effective wall system. Again, it's not just about the wall system, it's part of that multi-layer strategy of which the wall system is a part of. And the multi-layer strategy is infrastructure, technology, and personnel. So when we have that multi-layer strategy and effective levels in strategic locations, we will see that output, seizures go down, illegal immigration go down, assaults and agents go down. So we have that empirical data. And there's also data that Chief Rodney Scott talked about is we're able to shift resources. Another thing that is very important that the wall gives us is that part of that multi-layer strategy is what we become now is we become on the offensive. Instead of the cartels and smuggling organizations telling us where they're going to enter illegal immigrants or where they're going to send drugs, we get to shape their behavior and guide them where we want them to go, where we are better operationally prepared to interdict and seize. With that, Rodney, if you've got anything else?
I'll just give you a little bit of background. So the wall system, if you will, I've been in the Border Patrol 28 years. The entire 28 years we've been working on fine-tuning this concept, if you will, and seeing the immediate results when we created barriers and when we put in technology and the ability to move left and right. So the outputs, the metrics we put out every year, those are metrics. But I ask you a question. How do you measure the outcome, the safe and secure nation? I can tell you law enforcement agencies across this country that have very, very low crime. It doesn't mean you get rid of the police department. It doesn't mean they stop investing and trying to get better and smarter. That's the piece that's harder to measure, if you will. But the metrics go way beyond enforcement. So again, I'll just use San Diego for an example. We used to have trucks drive across the border 3-4 at a time on almost a daily basis, get into high-speed pursuits throughout town. Same thing happened here in Nogales and other areas. Those stopped immediately with a border wall system. It doesn't mean the cartels are going to try to stop smuggling drugs. Now we've got to deal with tunnels and other aspects. But it pushed that threat, the daily life and death threat that was posed to kids waiting for a school bus near the border, it pushed that out of those areas. How do you measure that? But the border wall, I can tell you, 28 years doing this job, there is no single investment that has a longer return on investment than border wall. Technology is about an 18-month return, and we got to recycle it and buy it again. Personnel are a minute-by-minute cost. The border wall system is about a 30-year, and that's a minimum estimate, about a 30-year investment that it's going to last. The investment is there. It's well worth it, and I can tell you that there's a ton of metrics that back that up.
You know, and I'll add another element to that. Thanks, Chief. So, look, we've always said since day one that the wall system is an effective impedance denial tool. What it does, one part, that it gives the Border Patrol agents increased time and capability to respond to interdict. It slows them down. It impedes them. It denies them. And so one of my questions, not for you, because I know you're just addressing the critics that are out there, so it's a fair question. But what I'll say is, how many gang members are acceptable to get into this country? How many sexual pedophiles are acceptable to make their way into this country? How many rapists? How many murderers? I could keep going on for a long time. How many is acceptable of individuals like that to make their way into our country? Now, people will say all the time, well, the overwhelming majority are decent people. I don't dispute that. We've never disputed that. But again, I'll turn around. I'll say we're focused on the wrong thing. How many gang members? How many rapists? How many murders? Just last week, or I think a week and a half ago, we, Border Patrol, encountered an individual that had a murder warrant out in California, had a murder warrant in Rhode Island. Happens every single day along the southwest border. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
Did you say there were 3,000 CBP men and women who had contracted COVID?
2,300.
What percentage of those contracted the disease while in the capacity of their work?
So it's hard to do. We do the same kind of contact tracing that is outlined by the CDC. It's not always 100% to be able to define that, but we do our best. And I think what's most important is that we're really focusing on contact tracing, and then we're continuing to, again, re-engage the workforce to make sure they remain vigilant, to make sure that they use the PPE that is required, make sure that they abide by all the regulations the best they can do. But remember, we've got about 43,000 badge-wearing gun toters in this agency. They can't telework it in. They've got to get up every morning, kiss their families goodbye, and they got to get out on the front lines and protect this country, to protect our home. And that's tough. And I say a lot of times is, before COVID, their job was tough. Before COVID, all they worried about, though, was themselves and risking their own lives. And they took that. If you ask them every single day, that's just part of the job. But now we bring COVID. Now it's not just about them. These Border Patrol agents, OFO, the whole host of CBP personnel that can't telework it in, now they're worried about their families. They're worried about each day that they get up and they have to go after and chase someone down that's illegally entering the country, or someone that is dying of dehydration in the mountains of Nogales, that we have to resources, have to go down there and risk their lives and get more exposure to someone that could have COVID that's trying to illegally enter. And you know what they're worried about now? That they're going to take COVID back to their families. I talked to a Border Patrol agent in one of the checkpoints last night. She contracted COVID. And you know what? She wasn't worried about herself. You know what she was worried about? Her 3 daughters. Her 3 daughters. Her daughter that was under 5 years old that didn't understand why mom had to isolate herself from her daughter. That's what we deal with every single day. Those stories aren't talked about enough, and it's frustrating. But every single day, that's why from the bottom of my heart, I say they're heroes. And they should be given accolades instead of the vile, disgusting rhetoric that's sometimes out there right now. Yep.
You mentioned that members have not passed any meaningful immigration reform. Are you in somehow, way, or shape putting some of this blame of what you're seeing on the borders back in the hands of Congress?
Absolutely, 100% yes. I've personally been on the Hill multiple times, explaining detail, giving them a strategic plan of the exactly type of meaningful legislation that they could address. One being one of the most significant things is the Florida Settlement Agreement, which ties our hands that if you're a family or an unaccompanied minor, we can only hold you for 20 days and then you have to be released. That was the genesis of the catch and release. Congress could end that in 15 minutes. They have refused to do so time and time again. So absolutely. And I'm telling you right now, as the economic conditions are worsening in Mexico and the entire Western Hemisphere due to COVID, get ready. We're already seeing the numbers increase. And why? Why did we know that was going to happen? Why did we anticipate that? Because the overwhelming of individuals who are illegally trying to enter this country are doing so for economic reasons. And now as we're seeing the economic conditions worsen in the Western Hemisphere driven by COVID, we're anticipating. And that's why it's so critical that we have an administration that understands border security is national security, understands that this depth and breadth of mission that we have to have the tools, like the wall, like technology, to be able to protect our home.
What's the process when that happens?
They absolutely are. Children, adults, there's no difference. Children could be COVID carriers just as equally as an adult can. So again, remember, we have shifted because of COVID from an immigration enforcement perspective to a public health perspective. We are getting our guidance and direction from the CDC, who issued Title 42, a public health directive that directed CBP from a public health perspective as part of this administration's COVID strategy to further reduce the introduction of COVID-19 into this country to save countless American lives? Yes. So we were returning those people immediately when we encountered them from a public health perspective.
Commissioner Morgan, you said the Border Patrol agents contracting COVID-19, those stories aren't talked about enough. We would love to do that story. You put us in contact with those agents, and we would love to do that.
Absolutely.
The question I have for you is the cross-border travel for non-essential travel has been closed down since March, and it's extended and extended. Any indication as things start to open up within the U.S. of when those restrictions might ease?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And we're doing the same thing that the entire country is doing, that every city and every state and every county is doing. And at this global pandemic, a very, very serious issue. But we're also balancing that against the reopening of the economy. And the entire United States is going through that balance right now. And so with respect to non-essential travel at our land POEs, both at the southern border and northern border, so we're doing it both, it's a North America approach, we are kind of methodically walking through that right now. I've had discussions with leaders from Brownsville to Baja, and everybody fully understands the seriousness of the global pandemic, but also the seriousness of reopening the economy. That's a balance that we're trying to strike. So right now we're in discussions to see how we can continue to implement Title 19, the non-essential travel, but do so in that balanced way going forward instead of approaching it with a broad brush approach. I'll give you an example. We're working with communities right now. Some communities are still closed down. Other communities are open back up. So I think we're in a position right now where we can set a list of criteria along with the CDC, working with the local communities on a joint effort to make a joint decision on what's the best for that specific community. And, you know, EAC, anything to add to that? Okay. Yep.
Wait. Concerns that we've heard from advocates who deal with refugees and asylum seekers on the border is that asylum seekers, legitimate ones in particular, are sort of falling through the cracks, that this crackdown on the border, they're victims of it. Is your agency, is Customs and Border Protection doing an adequate job of making sure that legitimate asylum seekers get a chance to get into the country?
Yes, so there's two parts of that, right? So the one is we are maintaining and supporting our refoulement obligations as the United States, even during a global pandemic. And then in addition to that, like TVPRA, for example, with children that come across, we are ensuring that we're doing everything we can upon encountering and try to determine whether they are in fact victims of trafficking. If they are, we do not remove them under Title 42. I'll let the chief talk a little bit more detail.
I don't have that much to add to it, except for that it's still in place. So if someone fears, they still have a credible hearing process that they can go through. But after being the chief patrol agent in San Diego during the original caravans, and now looking at it from a national perspective, I'd be remiss if I didn't challenge a little bit about what you termed the legitimate asylum seekers. Asylum is defined by law, and the vast majority, when they go through even the full-on process, are not determined to be legitimate asylum claims. What's preventing the people that really need that protection from getting it is the complete and total fraud and abuse of the asylum system that is then bringing waves and waves of people in. It backs up the entire court process. Our process is the same. We have to deal with anyone we catch. When we're interviewing them, if they have fear, they go through another process. The real atrocity here is that the entire justice system, the entire immigration system is backed up because a lot of people, even in this country, are encouraging people to make statements that are not accurate and make claims to try to get asylum, especially if a child, to go back to the Flores Agreement. Because they know the maximum time if they cross with a kid that we can hold them is 20 days. And then they're going to get released into society. And they don't show up for their court hearings. That's the abuse of the system. That's the atrocity.
Officers or agents at the ports of entry to do these interviews when they're in the queue, because we've heard stories down here in Nogales where there's sort of a metering system and it's just slowed to a trickle.
Yeah, so there's two things, so confusing two things. So pre-COVID, post-COVID. So post-COVID metering has been closed off because it's a public health crisis, because we're not going to further introduce the risk of COVID-19 into the country. That's the very genesis of the CDC order. So what you're referring to really is pre-COVID when metering was active. And again, you and I talked briefly a little while ago. Here's the challenge. It really goes right to the heart of what Chief Scott was saying, is when we're overwhelmed with the number of false and fraudulent asylum claims, what we have to do is we have to pull CBPOs off the vast, complex threats that we face every day. So CBPOs are trying to seize drugs, that killed 71,000 people in this country, more than the entire that died in the Vietnam War, right, in a single year for drug overdoses. So I have to pull CBPOs off the line to deal with the increased metering issue as we are flooded with fraudulent claims that do not satisfy the asylum criteria. That's what you're seeing. So the majority of the time, especially last year at the height, when we got 150,000 in a single month, of course we had to pull resources. We were overwhelmed at every part of the immigration process. And that's what I'm telling you. This is not a political statement. This is coming from the acting commissioner. The fact is that this administration has given us a network of policies and initiatives that enabled us to do what Congress has failed to do, enabled us to end catch and release, enabled us to reduce the flow of those fraudulent claims coming in by 75%. That's been a game changer. And so because of that, what you're seeing is now CBPOs are able to be freed up to do other missions, to look out, to do drugs, to help facilitate lawful trade and travel. And I'm telling you, as COVID has continued to ravage economies in the Western Hemisphere, I'm greatly concerned that we're going to continue to see an increase in those that are attempting to illegally enter this country. And so if we don't have a sound resolve, if we don't have sound policies, if we're not sending a sound, strong message, continuing to do what we're doing now, to tell these individuals that if you illegally enter, you are not going to be released and you will be returned. If we're not steadfast in that, if we're not committed to that, if we don't continue to do that and implement additional policies and give us the tools, you will see another unprecedented level of illegal migration happening. Anybody to add to that? Oh, yeah, please.
One of the things the Commissioner talked about, you asked about resources. By us freeing up our officers, you heard in my remarks, I talked about outbound operations. We were able to shift our resources to attack that direct threat to this nation of the transnational criminal organizations and seize countless weapons, money, munitions, the gamut, and also really kind of map out some of these networks by having the time to interview and discuss and talk to the folks so we could actually lay down where some of those gaps are and then address it. And that was a direct result of us being able to move some of our resources, as the chief had mentioned, with his agents along the border when he was able to shift them to cover other gaps. Okay. Thank you, sir.
And Dennis, I don't know if you want to jump in here too. There's another example. So our AMO operations. So right now, hey, in the height of the crisis, a lot of your resources were dedicated towards the illegal migration flow. I'd much rather take these resources. Hey, these are awesome resources. We don't have a lot of these to cover, every aspect of our country, of our home. We don't have enough. We definitely need more. So each one of these is a valuable asset. If the illegal migration flow continues and spike like last year, we have to pull these resources off higher priority threats. Drug seizures, like Dennis was saying. Look, we want to try to prevent the drugs from making it to our border. Hey, look, if we have to devote more of our resources to the illegal migration flow, we're pulling resources off of many threats. Dennis, I don't know if you want to add to that.
So when the border stays secure, when these gentlemen in their jobs and what they're doing right now can hold a line like that, I can take a resource like that P3. On average, every flight hour that thing's airborne, supporting the Jet of South mission, we get about 30 pounds of cocaine. On a typical year, that's about 250,000 pounds of cocaine. Now, that cocaine is not hitting Central America. That's not hitting those little communities. It's not affecting the law enforcement there, the judiciary systems there, just the mom and pop kind of places. It never touches. That means it never touches and works its way up through Mexico. It doesn't get there. That's a great impact we can do for our partners down in Central America. As we talked about here with these assets, these tend to be local assets, and they all tend to be very expensive. So prioritizing them in a way that most impacts the cartels is a big effort, and it's really kind of the end game of what we're all trying to do. Let me just tell you some of the changes that have gone on. That MEA right there, that is a littoral, in a sense, a predator. It's flying just within a couple hundred miles of the U.S. border, close range. That aircraft flies hundreds of miles off the coast, finding much larger just targets of interest off of Central and South America. But that alone, let me just give you some numbers that have changed in San Diego. San Diego, just in a 2-year, these are just some trends we're going to see. Total drugs in a 2-year time, from fiscal year 20 to 19, from 19 to 20 are up 70%. Vessels in a 2-year time period are up 82%. Vessels targeted off the coast found off the coast of San Diego, an 82% increase. Apprehensions from 19 to 20 are up 136%, and in a 2-year trend, it's 72%. So we're getting busier on the water right now as a result of the success these gentlemen and their agencies have had on land.
Thanks. So, hey, look, the way I phrase it is, illegal migration, those are coming with intent and knowingly to file false and fraudulent asylum claims. It's not a victimless crime. It's not. It's impacting every single day legitimate trade and travel. During the height of the crisis last year, we had to pull in excess of 740 CBPOs, men and women of blue, to go and help Border Patrol in processing centers and a whole host of other duties. You just heard from Dennis right now. We have to pull valuable resources off to tracking drug cartels to stop drugs from pouring this country, killing tens of thousands of Americans every single year because, as Chief Scott said, we're flooded with fraudulent fraud asylum claims. Okay, great.
So our first question comes from CNN, and this topic came from a lot of the different reporters that have sent questions in. And the question is, can Commissioner Morgan provide an update on the recidivism rate?
Yeah, you know what I'll do? I'm gonna kick that over to Chief Scott, but I'll set this up a little bit because that's a great question. Because what we're seeing, we started to see again at the tail end of February, because we had again eliminated 75% of the flow, over 80% of the families coming from the Northern Triangle countries. But what we saw was that then you can, as the numbers go down, what we're seeing is the demographic shift to Mexican nationals. And what we're seeing even in the midst of COVID is that trend's continuing. The overwhelming majority of our flow are Mexican nationals, and the overwhelming majority of the overall flow are single adults, a lot of them young single adults. And we are having a problem with recidivism. I'll let Chief Scott talk about that.
So our recidivism has gone up dramatically, but it's very geographically specific. So some areas it's in excess of 50%, in other areas it's significantly lower. It makes sense when you think about it. It's places like San Diego, El Centro, where you have Mexicali, large population centers, the recidivism rate is a lot higher. But the real reason behind it, and this is kind of a theme of things we were talking about before, one of the hard impacts of COVID-19 was a lot of things shut down. So we're returning people very, very quickly, but our ability and willingness, if you will, to prosecute people, to have a consequence to the illegal activity of crossing the border has been reduced. Because we know every single person that we take out of the Title 42 process and put into a judicial process where we're going to be face-to-face, we're going to have to detain them, is knowingly accepting additional risk to spread COVID in the United States. So we're balancing that with the Department of Justice and the courts very, very cautiously. But because we've assumed a little bit more risk in that area of the return, as opposed to taking on the risk of basically having courts that are infected with COVID, prisons, detention centers infected with COVID, we are dealing with a higher recidivist rate across the southwest border.
And what I'll add to that is one thing that I've been saying since COVID started. Before COVID, I was relentless on my attack on the disgusting, despicable cartels and human traffickers that exploited these migrants every single day, that abused them on their journey here, that treated them nothing better than animals. If you can see the picture here, illegal immigrants are actually marked like you would mark cattle. They're stuffed in trailers, tractor trailers, that are actually specifically designed for animals. And the cartels put these human beings in those containers. And so before COVID, I would attack those cartels religiously. I've shifted. In the middle of a global pandemic, the illegal immigrants themselves now have some responsibility. They knowingly are allowing themselves to be stuffed in these overcrowded, unsanitary conditions, whether it's stash house or a tractor trailer. And we talk about recidivism. So we're apprehending them, and we're talking to them about COVID. They know that they are being returned because of the increased risk of COVID. And what do? They turn right around and come back again, exposing every migrant that they come in contact with, exposing every single CBP employee they come in contact. And if they get away from us, which some do, they're exposing the American people. It's outrageous. And they have some accountability in this as well. Right now, in the middle of a global pandemic, this should not be happening, and it is happening every single day, especially on the recidivism front. Another question?
Our last question is from the New York Times, and again, this is another that had similar questions from others. It says, can you say now that there will come a time when Title 42 emergency restrictions at the southwest border will no longer be necessary? What needs to happen in order to ease those restrictions?
Yeah, so I really appreciate those serious questions, whoever asked that. That's obviously a critical question. What I can tell you is that ultimately that is going to be the CDC's decision. It is a CDC public health order. It's being looked at every 30 days based on the changing conditions, based on what we know about the disease at this point, how it's being impacted in the United States. But I think this is an important issue too. When CDC makes this decision, it's not just about what's happening in the United States, right? In fact, that's not what the CDC order about. The CDC order is about preventing the further spread from outside our country into our home. That's the genesis of Title 42. So even if we have a vaccine that is available and it's making tremendous progress in the United States, we need to look at Mexico. We need to look at the Northern Triangle countries. We need to look at the Western Hemisphere of Brazil, that is a major through point for people to illegally enter the United States. We need to look at how well they're doing. We need to look at how well they're being still impacted by COVID-19 before we make our decision. Now, from CBP's perspective, we're providing that detail, that data, and that intelligence to CDC, of which they will make the final determination with respect to how we end Title 42, whether we phase it out, and how that's going to be done. Good? Okay. Thanks, guys. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time. I know this is kind of a long one, but you see a lot to cover. Appreciate it. And we're, all of us, we're going to stick around for a few more minutes. So if you'd like to have individual questions with any of us, on camera, off camera, we're all available. Thank you.